California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone and enjoy the show. If it's Monday or Wednesday night, then it must be California Haunts Radio Night. Please take this time to gather some popcorn, hamburgers, hot dogs, maybe even dinner or whatever snacks you eat, and have a sit down in front of the TV, the computer, or even your cell phone and enjoy the show. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Boy, I'm getting spoiled with these days. The weather's so nice, and I don't have to have that obnoxious air conditioner on in the background. I get to like this. But anyway, it's going to be heating up again, so I'm just giving you a heads up that probably next week we'll have that obnoxious thing blowing in the background. Anyway, welcome. We're doing a noon show today. It's a special show for us. Our guest is from the UK, and I'm really excited to have him on. Charles Christian. I visited England quite a few years ago, and I had a very great cousin named Terry who gave us tours all over the UK, and she knew all about the legends, and it was just so fascinating. At the age I was, 14, 15 years old, it was just absolutely incredible to hear some of the legends. We visited one of Henry VIII's castles and stuff like that. So when I heard this gentleman on another radio show, I was really excited to bring him on because I'm really interested in a lot of the legends being fairy folk and ghosts and other things that people over there like to talk about. Anyway, my name is Charlotte. I'll be your host for the next hour. I'm also the owner and operator of the California Haunts Paranormal Investigation Team. You can find us at www.californiahaunts.org, and the website for the radio show is www.californiahauntsradio.com. Yeah. The other one's .org. It's because I got two of the same title practically. And you can visit us over there because I've got all the archives for the show. Every show we've ever done here is over there, and I'm going to be updating a huge update because before we were here, we were on Blog Talk for like 4 years. So we've got a couple hundred shows over on Blog Talk. So I'm going to try and do an archive list for that as well. So we'll see how long that takes. But that's all going to be over on the radio website at www.californiahauntsradio.com. Anyway, without further ado, I'm going to introduce our guest and we can get the show on the road. Good morning. Good afternoon.
Hello there.
It's evening for you. It's afternoon for me.
Yes, it's 8 o'clock in the evening over here.
How's the weather over there?
Very good at the moment. Very good.
Nice.
We're we don't have your heats, but we're having what's good for an English summer.
Okay, cool. Tell me a little bit about yourself.
Right. Weirdly, I started out in life as a barrister. That's the lawyers who wear the wig and gowns in court. Mm-hmm. And I appeared to join the profession at the only time that the law wasn't making money. So I moved on and became a journalist and worked for a number of tech publications, medical publications. I did a big long-running series on doctors who are murderers, mainly English murderers. And then as time went on, I was able to move into writing stuff that, if you like, wasn't quite within the day job. And I started to pursue my interest in history, folklore, legends, a lot of the stuff I grew up with as a kid, and tales being told by parents and aunts and uncles and things like that.
What do you think is one of the biggest bits of folklore that you have over there?
It's so much of it, actually. I mean, that's the thing. We've got people. We've got properties that have been inhabited for hundreds and hundreds of years. So there's so much of it. It's very hard to put a finger on it. I mean, where I now live in East Anglia, that's the bit of England that sticks out on the east. And any of your listeners who've had family who were in the American Air Force in World War II, they'd have been based here because it's so flat and close to Germany. So it's thick with old airfields and things. But the area I'm in, we have Anne Boleyn, who is probably, he's one of, you mentioned Henry VIII earlier on. She's was his second wife and the first to lose her head. And she is probably the most frequently seen ghost in the UK. And her family home is near here. And it's said that every year on the eve of her death, a coach rides up to the house and she's sitting in the coach with her head on her lap and goes into the house.
She's seen at the Tower of London, isn't she?
She's seen at the Tower of London. She's also seen at a place in Kent called Hever Castle. Obviously, the Tower of London, because that's where she was executed. And she's also seen at other castles because her family were very wealthy and had lots of property. So, you know, she's seen at the place where she was a child. She's seen at the place where she lived as a teenager, and other places as well. And we even have her father, who is now reportedly a ghost and is cursed on the eve of his daughter's death to cross 12 bridges in Norfolk in a horse and coach from midnight and before dawn. But there's such a distance that it's impossible to do. So he's doomed to do this every year to eternity because he wasn't very nice. He basically dropped his daughter and his son in it to keep his own place in the king's favor, and sacrifice his daughter for his own reputation. So he pays in the afterlife, supposedly.
Well, like you say, there's so many legends over there, and that's what makes it so cool. I mean, for us, I mean, we have our ghost hauntings and stuff, but it's not like it is over there because we don't have the history to go back that far in time either. I mean, we're lucky probably on our East Coast, maybe the 1600s if we're lucky.
Yes. Yeah.
You know, where you guys can go way back.
Yes. Yeah. There's that famous story when Ozzy Osbourne was caught creating a public nuisance outside the wall of the Alamo, and he said, "But you know, there are public lavatories, restrooms in the UK that are older than this place." So,
I love Ozzy.
Yeah,
I love Ozzy. He's quite the personality, especially on TV here. He's really the personality. We love him over here.
Yeah.
I know I visited one of Henry VIII's castle. I can't remember quite where it was. I know she told us that he had a weird quirk about he was paranoid that people were going to kill him, so he would brick himself into his bedrooms.
I haven't heard that one. He was definitely, and with good reason, paranoid about being killed, and there were a number of attempts to poison him. And he actually had special laws enacted for poisoners, that very gruesome torture. You were boiled to death for trying to poison the king. It was repealed after he died, but yeah, there were a lot of attempts on his life, as there were on his daughter Elizabeth, who was by Anne Boleyn, who we've just mentioned. It was a dangerous time, and the way they operated, the royal courts were packed with people who would be almost camping out there for days, if not weeks, waiting to see the king or to try and get an audience with the king or to it. And so there was this huge population floating around the royal courts, and all manner of people were in that. So security was an issue.
Tell me about fairy folk, because I know that's a great, because you talked about that on the other show, and I thought that was
Yeah.
rather fascinating. Tell me about the fairy folk, because I ran into a paranormal case here about a year ago where it involved fairy folk, and I was very
Hmm.
surprised because one of our sensitives went in and said, "You're not going to believe this, but it's fair. It's fairies that are causing this." And I went, "Really?" So tell me about fairy folk.
Yeah. I mean, there is a theory that the Irish immigrants brought fairy folk over to North America,
Mm-hmm.
and that they also came over with, traditions also came over with some of the earlier English settlers in the early part of the 17th century. So it's not a country, although you tend to think America really doesn't have much to do with
Right.
fairy folk. There is a long tradition of it going back, and accusations of witchcraft back in the Salem days and things. Again, some of them were associated with fairy folk, but over in the UK and Ireland, it's a fascinating topic because it has been around for such a long time. There's tales of fairy folk enchanting people going right back 1,000+ years, and a lot of the Saxons, the people who were here around the country before the Normans came over and the Norman conquest, 1066 and all that, a lot of them have fairy names in their the sources of their names have a sort of an elfin fairy touch to them. So there's this long tradition of it, and depending on how you like to accept it, one of the views is that the land of the fairy folk,
Mm-hmm.
is not of this world, it's another world, but it's parallel to this one. So it's almost as if there are portals that you can go through, and they're existing in a parallel dimension to the world of humans, and that at certain times of the year the barriers are thinner and there are certain places where you can cross over. So there's a lot of folklore about fairy rings, which are naturally occurring formations of mushrooms in a circle or toadstools.
Hmm.
And it's long been believed to be very, very unlucky to step into a mushroom ring, a fairy ring, because that's where the fairy folk live, and basically you can't see them until you
Mm-hmm.
step in there, and they're there then, and they will then dance with you. And the normal tale is that time in fairyland lasts so much longer than in the real world. And so you get tales of people who think they've only been gone a few hours. And when they come back out of the fairy ring, maybe days, years, and in some instances, decades have gone past. And everybody they know is dead and old. And there's this strange time continue sort of time divergence going on there, and that again is one of these traits that's associated with the fairy folk and has been associated with them for a long time. That 7 days in fairyland is the equivalent of 7 years in the real world.
I never knew that.
Yeah. There's a lot of them. There's one tale of a king called King Hurler, and he went for basically a 3-day party in fairyland at the request of the fairy king. And when he came out, 300 years had passed, and he was told basically to stay on his horse, because if he didn't, he would come back into Earth time and some of his men who jumped off their horses crumbled away to dust. And when he came back, he was long forgotten. His kingdom had fallen. Everybody he knew had gone. And say it's a continuing theme, that there are these places where you can cross over. You get the same stories about stone circles. Stonehenge is the best known one, but
right. I was just thinking about that.
Yeah, there's lots of other stone circles, not quite so impressive and not quite so well known in more remote parts, and many of them have legends that at certain times of the year, fairy folk can be seen in there, dancing, moving about, and that if you go there, you risk being captured by the fairies and held by them, and you may never ever return to the real world again.
Wow. Are there good fairies and bad fairies, or just mischievous?
The fairy lore splits them into two sorts: the Seelie court and the unseelie court. That's a Scottish word, Seelie. And the Seelie court are the good fairies, in that they will tolerate human beings and humor them. They don't necessarily like them, and they may play tricks on them, but they're not malicious. Whereas the unseelie court have no time for humans and will be horrible to them, and you want to avoid them. They're not the good guys. And I say it's again, as I say, it goes back so long, and you hear people talking about finding fairy arrows, and really these are just stone flints from the Stone Ages, sort of arrowheads and the things. But obviously people didn't know about ancient history when they were finding these things, so they would find these very small arrows and say, well, it must be some kind of fairy weaponry. And it runs through, and sometimes the good fairies will bestow a gift on you. Sometimes they will bestow a curse on you. There's a mountain in Wales where it's said that if you go up there on certain times of the year, and spend the night there, you will come down either insane or a poet, depending on what the fairy folk do for you and how they treat you and how they view you.
Now, there's certain fairies that do certain things that are, like you got your earthbound fairies, correct?
Yeah. I mean, the fairy lore's a bit confusing, because if you go back to the language of the time, French and early English, the word for fairies was the same as the word for elves. And so there is this theory that elves are actually just another name for fairy folk. And they are generally depicted as being almost human in size, maybe a little bit finer and a little bit smaller, but not tiny. However, in the 19th century, the belief grew up that fairies were tiny little fluttering creatures with the wings.
Tinkerbell.
So you've got Tinkerbell, exactly, Tinkerbell. Yeah, exactly. And so there's this sort of bit of a mishmash, is that are they tall, almost human-like creatures, or are they the little fluttery creatures with wings? And the taller human-like ones, they are never depicted in wings, but they can move ever so fast, and they are different to humans. They look like humans, but they're different to humans. And so they appear to be flying because they can move so fast, and they can jump and leap and generally display all the characteristics we now associate with superheroes, that they can leap and run around, as opposed to the little Tinkerbells.
Yeah, because I know popular or Christmas ornament here are wood sprites. Little crystal wood sprites.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, you're dealing. I mean, another name for fairies is elementals,
right?
In that they are a magical creature, and you have the ones associated with woods, and obviously there's a long tradition of elves and fairy folk being associated with woods, and sometimes they call them sylvan. And then there are the water sprites or water fairies associated with water, lakes, rivers, and the like. And they each have their own habitation and their own living places. And again, they can also be mischievous. Again, going back to where I live now, we have a tradition of little creatures called Heiter sprites, and they are seen they're really will-o'-the-wisps, and they lurk in marshy places. And again, where I live, there's a whole section called the Fens, which is very boggy land, and the more evil ones will lead people astray across marshes, so they either get stuck in the marsh, or worse still, they drown and sink into the marshes. And until the early part of the last century, the 1920s, 30s, people would say to their children, mothers would say to their children, you be good, or the Heiter sprites will get you. And it was a sort of a warning.
This is all very fascinating to me, because like I mean, there's legends here, but it's not like you have legends there. Like, I found one thing that I kind of found, that when you ghost hunt here, the ghosts are a little nicer, because when you get into some of those castles over there, it's always some really upset ghost. There's always one that's in torment. Does that make sense?
It does. It does. I suppose again, I mean, you must have unhappy ghosts from battlefields and things, and obviously we've got all the battlefields and all the castles where people were tortured and horrible things happened to them. And if you accept the idea that a lot of ghosts are trapped where some really traumatic event happened in their life, and obviously being killed in battle or being tortured to death in some dungeon is about as traumatic as you can get, then they are ingrained in the masonry, in the landscape. And there used to be a tale of after the Battle of Edgehill, which was in the English Civil War in the 17th century, that for several years afterwards, on the anniversary of the battle, you could see ghostly warriors fighting in the sky, and people said, they could even recognize sort of relatives of theirs who'd been in the battle and died. So you've got this strong tradition of ghosts being associated with a place and trapped there, basically, until it just does seem that ghosts do seem to almost wear out over time. They haunt for so long, and then they start to fade away. People have said, we don't get any ghosts of Stone Age men, people going back 10,000 people, 10,000 years. They seem to have gone. And most of the ghosts seem to be medieval to, early modern to recent. And the older ghosts slowly fade away. Though again, we still have tales of Roman soldiers, and the Romans occupied and ran England, or was then the Roman province of Britannia, for a couple of thousand years. And there's an intriguing ghost story from a city called York, the north of England, and that is that a builder was working in the basement of an old, I think it was an old bishop's house there. Again, there's a big cathedral there and a lot of history there. They've still got the walls all around the city and the city gates and things. And he was working there and he saw a column of Roman soldiers march through the cellar where he was working. But the intriguing bit on his report was that he could only see them from the knee up. And it was then subsequently established, because there's always excavations going on where there's building works, that the actual road surface of Roman times was a couple of feet beneath the then surface level. So they were walking on the level that they walked on during their lifetimes, but it had been built up with rubbish and rebuilding and new foundations and things. So hence the fact they appeared to be cut off at their knees as they marched past.
That's interesting. Yeah, I've heard stories like that. I've heard stories, and I don't know if it's in England or over in Italy, where there's different roads and stuff where people will see them marching. They'll see the ghostly soldiers marching like that.
Yeah. Well, Italy obviously is where the Romans all came from.
Right.
It was the center of their empire, and their whole road network focused there. And there's a big mountain range going through the middle of Italy, so it tends to limit where your roads go. Naturally, and the same's happened in this country.
Right.
The roads were just built over and built up, and the old Roman roads are the basis of our modern day roads. And quite naturally, it's been built up, and the Roman ground level is many feet below the modern ground level. So it makes sense that if they're walking where they knew they'd be, and same thing why they appear to walk through walls and things is because when they were there, those walls weren't there, or there were doorways there, or the buildings were in different structure, particularly with old buildings. Even a castle, some of them lasted in occupation 300 or 400 years, and so they were refashioned and rebuilt and changed, and design was changed. And so somebody who had some incident in a castle, say the Tower of London in 1100 AD, the castle that by modern times, it's been transformed and changed, and doorways have been sealed up, passages have been sealed up, so people walk through the walls.
One of the funniest things out ghost hunting is when you have a medium or a psychic with you, because if you go into an older building, I've seen them where they walked into walls because they're seeing it as it was before. And it's not. I mean, it's not funny because they run into it, but it is funny at the same time because, they'll be talking and saying, "Well, I'm feeling this and this and this," and then boom, they make impact.
Yeah. No, that's reasonable, because the modern building doesn't have the same vibes as the original building, or the building that the haunting is associated with. Yeah.
Absolutely.
No, it's intriguing.
It makes me wonder about the royal family, because they're living in all those manor houses and all those old buildings. I mean, talk about ghost investigators. They must be real experts at it.
Yeah. Windsor Castle is the oldest one the royal family live in. St James's Palace is also well, Windsor Castle is medieval, the original bit. St James's Palace, that is sort of Tudor, and then the other ones are a bit later. You know, Buckingham Palace is 18th century and so on. So, and the one where the Queen goes for her holidays, Sandringham, which again is in my part of the world, that is 19th century, you know, Victorian era. So, but again, they must have ghosts because there's so many hundreds of people who've lived and worked there.
Yeah.
And some of them are so large, you know, with lots of rooms that are probably sealed up and not used anymore because, you know, as I said, in the early days, the royal court was a huge institution, and there would be hundreds of people attending or trying to get an audience with the king and queen. Now there isn't, so there's lots of space there that, you know, are just closed up, musty rooms not used. So, you know, who knows what goes on there, and in those rooms that the queen never goes in.
Sure, there's a lot of places to imprint. You know,
Yes.
a lot of places. I also know of some legends too for some of the castles, you know, over in England and Scottish castles where there. I know I heard of one of a lone bagpiper.
Yeah.
Who do you know about that one?
There's several with bagpipers. I think one of the reasons is bagpipes are a particularly mournful sound, especially just one piper. When there's a whole band marching along, then there's a whole different vibe to it. But by themselves, they are actually quite spooky sounds, and sounds travel a long way. And you know, there's various tales of pipers who are playing a lament for their colleagues who've been lost in battle, because the Scottish used to be a clan-based society, and the different clans were always warring with each other. And later time, they started having different religious affiliations, and so they were fighting. And the history of Scotland is pretty much 300 or 400 years of civil war with people squabbling with each other and plotting against each other. And some of the castles have, again, very long histories and very weird histories. Glamis Castle, that's spelt Glamis with an IS ending. That one is a castle that the present Queen's mother, she grew up there. She was a daughter of that family, the Bowes-Lyons. And that has a number of ghost stories, including supposedly a hideously deformed earl, the rightful heir, who was so hideous that he was locked away in a room, and his remains are still kept there, and it's been a big secret in the family. And there's a couple of tales of people when there were house parties, again, when you're going back to the equivalent of the you know, roaring 20s in the US, when Great Gatsby with the big house parties and things. Similar trend in England and in Scotland, and people tried to find the haunted room by hanging handkerchiefs out of each window, on the basis of the window that didn't have a handkerchief there was clearly the one no one could find, so it must be the mysterious walled up room. And supposedly they did spot a room, but the laird, the owner of the castle, wouldn't let anybody go there. But you know, there's other tales there of they brought in they had peace talks with another clan and invited them into the castle and then slew them all. And again, there's a room that no one dare go into because it's haunted by the spirits of all the clansmen who were murdered there. And just anyone's Holyrood House, a palace in Edinburgh, that was where Mary Queen of Scots lived, and she had a private secretary called Rizzio, and he was stabbed to death in front of her eyes, and by members of the family who didn't like him, and he is said to haunt the place. And her own husband, Lord Darnley, died in mysterious circumstances when the house he was living in exploded and was blown to pieces. So there's a lot of bloodthirsty history. So it's not surprising that you get bloodthirsty ghost stories and plenty of ghost stories, because it just seems inconceivable that people aren't that spirits aren't trapped there in those circumstances.
Absolutely. Yeah, I have read stories and seen stuff where like back in the old back in those days they had a bell system down in the servants' quarters or down in the kitchen to get the attention of the people if they needed food or whatever. And there's a lot of stories even of today when they're doing tours in some of these castles where the bells will go off. And there's no one running them.
Yes. I mean, you're talking of very big properties, and how do you communicate with the servants when you say, we need some more coal for the fire, we need some more port to drink? And they had a whole system of bells, and each main room in the house was connected by metal cables to bells in the servants' hall, and the servants would know when the bell rang, they'd know which room was ringing, so they'd send a maid or a butler up there to see what was wanted. And you again, a lot of tales of the bells ringing. I mean, cynics would say, well, the wiring's 100 years old, and it's probably just damp and rust and the natural contraction and expansion of metal in old buildings and things. But again, happens too often for it to be a coincidence, I think.
Absolutely. And then, of course, there's the stories, the tales of woe of the lost loved ones, the ladies that are waiting for their men to come back, right? There's a lot of that going on.
There's a lot of that. And again, men went off to war and didn't come back. A lot of wars, a lot of unhappy people. And that's probably what we call stately homes. Those are sort of big mansions in the country that not the aristocracy, the top aristocrats lived in, but the gentry, the landed gentry, we call them, lived in. And a lot of them have those tales of unhappy souls there. And you have to remember the social background, that getting married in those days, we're talking as recently as the early 20th century, in rural areas and places where you didn't have Facebook, you didn't have social media, it was very hard to communicate. And for a lot of young women, their chances of finding a husband were quite slim. And if they weren't, they were then going to be doomed to be old maids and, just look after other people's children, or sit in a remote part of the house unmarried. So it was a big thing. And again, losing your boyfriend, fiance, husband in a war Also, of course, divorce was frowned upon. So remarriage was difficult, and the Victorian era mourning period after you'd lost someone was a very long time. So it was a big thing. And if you lost your loved one, well, that was probably it, and you'd be an unhappy, lonely woman for the rest of your life. I say we're reflecting the social mores of those times, which might seem puzzling to modern times, but that was the fact there. And there's a tale I talk about. It's about a house near where I grew up in the north of England, and there were 3 daughters of the house, and the father had become wealthy and was having a big brand new modern, for those times, property built, and they were going to move out of a smaller, more old-fashioned building. And one of the daughters was very keen to move into it, and she kept going over to the building site to see what it was like, and really looking forward to it. But unfortunately, on one particular journey between the 2 properties, she was attacked. We'd call it a violent mugging these days, and she was attacked and robbed, and unfortunately subsequently died of her injuries. But before she died, she said that, when I die, I want my head to be buried within the new house, so I'd be able to enjoy it and experience it in the afterlife. Now, the family were quite understandably mortified at this thought, appalled by it, and assumed that it was just the ravings of a woman who was dying and suffered bad injuries and not to be taken seriously. However, so they buried her normally in the family plot. But then when the family moved into the new house, a few months later, there were bangings and clatterings and generally a lot of activities going on to convince everybody that the house was haunted and that it might have been the daughter, something to do with it. So they opened up her grave and found that miraculously her head had already naturally separated from the rest of her body. So they took it as a clear sign that this was divine intervention, that she was to do that. So they put the head and they kept it in the house. And the story is, it's a house called Burton Agnes, and the story is that the head is still there. And for several hundred years, it was actually kept on a table in the front of the house. And people had different values then. People looked at things differently, and
I'm sure they did.
and every time anybody thought this is a bit horrible, and apparently a couple of people thought maybe now's the time to just take the head away and bury it somewhere out of the way, there'd be a repeat of all the bangings and crashings and hauntings, and so they'd bring the head back out again and everything quiet would go. And it's said that the head is still there. It's now in a concealed compartment behind the wooden paneling of the property, and it's known only to the current lord of the manor and his eldest son. And that's the tale of Old Nance, as she's called, Old Nancy. And it's a thing. There are actually a number of old houses in England where they do have skulls, not always on public display, but kept there, and they're of illustrious ancestors, and they're almost they're definitely regarded as being bringers of good luck. That they almost protect the property, and it's a guiding, it's a protective spirit, which is considering all this was taking part when we were supposedly a Christian country, really goes back to prehistory and the Celts, the people who were here before the Romans turned up, who did have a head skull sort of cult, and the skulls of their enemies and skulls of their ancestors were regarded as sacred, and again intimately linked with the property.
It's funny because even now, being more modern times, when our relatives pass away, we do tend to ask them to help us. We tend to ask them to protect us, to help, and like I said, to help us with certain things. So in a way, it's similar. We just don't keep them physically with us.
No. But I mean, until relatively recently, the Victorians in particular, who were, I suppose, quite obsessed with death, and possibly because Queen Victoria, after her husband died relatively young, she was in mourning for the best part of about 20 years, and it was became a constitutional issue. She wore black for the rest of her life, and during that era, was the era where people kept lockets of hair from their deceased loved ones.
Sure.
They had intricate little models made, sort of plaster casts made of their loved ones' hands. You see them in some stately homes, and there's just sort of a hand there on a slab and made of marble, and castings of them, and keeping some of their clothes and things. I mean, keeping clothes, people still do. We still keep favorite souvenirs of a favorite relative, even though they've been long gone. All that's great grannies. And we still have that attachment.
There's even societies out there that will dig them up every year
and
hang out with them, and then put them back in the ground.
Yeah. Some of the heading out towards Indonesia, I think, and Madagascar, they do it. But I mean, there's the Mexican Day of the Dead,
right?
Is an element of not quite digging them up and hanging out with them, but going to their graves and hanging out with them on the other side of the grave.
Having picnics. I mean, even in Victorian times here in the U.S., well, not Victorian, but you know what I mean. Even in earlier times in the U.S., people would go out to the the graveyards and sit and have picnics.
Yeah. I mean, it's that. It's somehow you're keeping in contact with your lost loved ones, and that's where favorite granny was, or or a young child who a child who died in early age, and again, infant mortality was a big thing until relatively recent times, and if the son of a family died, that could be a big issue in terms of economics, hopes for the family in the future. The person who would keep the family name going, keep the family business, keep the farm going. If they died, that was obviously a major tragedy. So it affected people. And I say some of these things go back not that long. Certainly in the early part of the 20th century, people were still going for picnics. And, obviously the Mexicans still do it when they have the Day of the Dead. But people made more of it, I think, and I don't know whether we've become a little bit more casual or more accepting of death, or don't make such a big deal of it. But it's human nature.
Absolutely. What about Arthurian legend?
Sorry?
King Arthur?
Yeah. Oh, right. Yeah. Well, he's wonderful. I mean, obviously he's the #1 superhero in England. I mean, it's quite clear King Arthur that you see in some of the movies in the shining armor, he didn't exist in that time frame, because that was relatively well documented and he wasn't there. But there's that period when the Romans were leaving, the Roman legions were going, and the Romano-British, the Celts who were left, were under attack by the Saxons and also the Scots who were coming down over Hadrian's Wall in the north. And it does seem that there were warlords who would fight these enemies, and probably based on the late Roman Empire soldiers, where they started to use cavalry a lot more, so they could do rapid movement from one place to another. So they were knights, and indeed the Roman term for them was knights. And I'm not sure whether there was an individual Arthur or whether he's an amalgamation, a sort of race memory of a number of leaders who fought the fight against the Saxons when the Romans had left. So, you know, I think there is a historical basis for the legend of King Arthur, but that is not quite King Arthur and Camelot, although some of the sites associated with the legendary King Arthur were clearly military sites that were occupied and used during that period. So, you know, again, linking back to it. So I think he may well actually be a bit of amalgam of several different people, a composite character. But, you know, he again took off as a legend relatively early. You know, he's you know, 300-400 years after his death, you know, people are telling tales about him and writing legends about him and carrying forward the legend. And the abbey at, names escape me, in the southwest. Ooh, it'll come to me anyway. It's the abbey's long gone, but they had a tradition that they'd found the bones of King Arthur and Guinevere there, and there's a piece of stone that appeared maybe have been a gravestone that appears to say, here was King Arthur, or Arturus Rex. And again, going back a long time, and the legends built up. And interestingly, the French also took it up, because there is this idea that the Britons, the people left by the Romans, they were the same people. Some of them were forced out by the Saxons, and they moved to the north of France, the area it's called Brittany, where they speak Breton language, and they have an Arthurian legend as well. And so it became an international legend. And, you know, I always think there must be something in it, because you're talking of a time when the legends could only be spread more or less by word of mouth, by a minstrel or a storyteller. You know, some were written down, but most people were illiterate, so they wouldn't benefit from it. So it was relatively a handful of people. The monks and people in monasteries would know it. But it became a part of the legendary history of the British Isles, and remains through to this day. You know, it's undimmed, and I suppose every generation revisits it and gives a slightly different spin on it from the historical point of view. And, you know, Arthurian movies still come out, Arthurian TV series still come out. It's still part of the culture of the country, and long may it be.
Well, that was a question I was thinking is what do, because you obviously over there, you guys know the actual legend as opposed to what Hollywood knows. So,
Yeah.
like when that musical came, when that musical came out, what did everybody over in Great Britain think about it?
Camelot.
Yeah.
Oh, everybody loved it. No, it was hugely popular. No, it was hugely popular because it was still the basic main Arthurian legend about King Arthur and his troubled relationship with Guinevere and Sir Lancelot and the affair with Lancelot and Guinevere that, you know, goes back 1,000 years into the histories. So it was still the same basic story of the Knights of the Round Table and Camelot and everything, and you know, it just struck a chord. I mean, it came out in the 1960s, and in England, at least, that was a period of retrospection because the old British Empire, which came to an end at the end of the Second World War, and then all the liberation movements and independence movements throughout what was the old empire took place. And about that time, a lot of people were thinking, you know, oh, the glory days are gone. And then along comes King Arthur with, you know, and Camelot with reviving it and going back again to the glory days of ancient history when, you know, everything was great. And so, you know, it landed at the right time, and it just hit a positive vibe that everybody loved.
Fantastic. I want to go back a little bit from what we were talking about at the beginning of the show. The Cornish miners that came over.
Yeah.
One of the legends that we have here is the Tommy knockers down in the mines.
Yeah.
And I have come, and I can honestly say in my investigations, because I live in Sacramento, which is central to the gold country, and I've had 2 or 3 cases that have involved Tommy knockers.
Yeah.
And it's been very interesting because, you know, if I'm remembering right, they're very mischievous.
Yeah.
And I have had clients tell me that they see these little men, you know, maybe 3 feet tall, wearing overalls, beards, the whole thing, and then they'll see them in their houses, you know, their house running around.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't get those as such, but they're certainly back in the days of the Cornish tin mines. They certainly had a equivalent. There were sprites, spirits. The names vary, pixies.
Sure.
That lived down there, and they were mischievous. That, you know, they would hide your digging equipment, but if they liked you, they might head you towards where there was a new seam of copper, or obviously in your country, new seam of gold.
Sure.
And that they would be active if there was the risk of a collapse, you know, a cave-in, or you know, a problem in the mine, that they would alert people, providing, you know, you did things like you left a bit of food for them, treated them nice, left them things that they could use. There's a long sort of tradition with not so much Tommy knockers, but various types of hobgoblins and creatures that if you're good to them and leave them things, they'll help you and they will do chores for you. If they're bad for you, they will be mischievous and they will lose things for you. So it's that similar thing. that the fairy folk,
Sure.
again, we're back to elementals.
Right.
And one of the names we have for them is the good people. If you are good to them, they will reciprocate and maybe not necessarily be good for you, but at least will not be bad for you. They'll be friendly, and they leave out a pie, some food at night, or a dish of milk or something like that they will eat or take back to where they are. And again, it comes back to where we're talking about with the skulls. They live in the house and they bring good luck to the house, and they're a helpful spirit to have there. It's going back to the Romans. They were great believers that there were house gods who would help you, and you would pray to them. There were the big gods who caused thunder and wars and things like that. But there were all these little house gods that we'd call fairies or elves, who were on your side, and as long as you remembered them and were nice to them, they'd be nice to you, and good luck would stay in the house.
Fantastic. Oh my gosh, this hour has gone by so fast. I'm so glad
It
you came
has.
on.
It has.
Oh my, I could talk to you for hours about this stuff. I really could. And I would really appreciate if you come back on it on a later date so we could do this again.
Yeah, I'd definitely be up for that.
And talk about more stuff, because there's so much more to talk about. So much more.
There is so much. Yes.
And I thank you so much. I really do.
No, it's my pleasure. My pleasure. It's been great talking to you.
All right. Well, you have a good rest of your evening, sir. And like I said, I will be in touch. I will definitely be in touch, because I'd like to get you back on and talk some more.
Great.
Because I know we touched on part of it. We didn't touch on everything. There's a lot of other stuff out there we could talk about. All right. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. Oh, how do people reach you? How can they contact you, before I forget?
If they want to contact me, my website is urbanfantasist.com. So it's like urban fantasy, but it's fantasist. And urbanfantasist.com has got me, and you can also find me on Twitter there, and social media and everything. Urban Fantasist.
Right. Thank you.
Hunt that down.
All right. Yeah. Write that down.
Yes.
But like I said, thank you so much, and I will be in touch with you, because I'd love to, maybe later in September or something, we can talk some more.
Yeah,
because
definitely.
I'm really eager to hear more. You got me going on this now.
Oh no, that was lovely.
I'm going to be hitting the books.
It was fun. It was fun being interviewed by you.
Cool. Thank you. I'm going to hit the books because of you. I'm going to hit the books.
Good.
All right. You have a good one, sir.
Take care.
Thank you.
Indeed. Bye now.
Bye-bye. All right, that was a fun show. We're going to get him on again in September, towards the end of September, hopefully. Thanks, guys. We did a Rare Noon show, and it was a good one. I had a lot of fun. I hope you did. We're not going to be on again until Monday. We're back on our regular schedule because we did a Sunday show. It's our 3 days, and so we'll be back on Monday. But boy, you better tune in Monday. We're going to be on our regular time, because we got a gentleman coming on who's going to have a documentary coming out. His name is Don Brown. He's an author, and not only that, is he has done research on the tragedy of SEAL Team 6, which was shot down over Afghanistan in 2011. And so he's got some interesting research about that SEAL team and what may have actually happened to them. So you guys need to tune in, on Monday at 6:30 p.m. Pacific time. Anyway, if you like the show, share it with 5 of your friends. If you didn't like the show, share it with 5 of your enemies, because we're trying to get these share things going across and build up our downloads and all that good stuff. As of today, we've got quite a few downloads going, and I'm real excited. We have grown by leaps and bounds this month, and I'm shocked. So I hope it keeps up. I hope it wasn't like a one-time month deal. I'm real excited about it. As you can see, I have a ticker running at the bottom of the screen here. That's because California Haunts is a paranormal team that does not get paid to go out and help people. We are purely donation-based, nonprofit, and all this comes out of pocket. Internet, service, everything, mics, all the good toys. It all comes out of pocket. And, we, like everybody else, we need to keep our equipment up and keep everything going. So if you could find it in your heart to donate something to us, it doesn't have to be a lot. That would be great. And that would be at paypal.me/California Haunts. And if you want to visit our YouTube page, go ahead and Google California Haunts Paranormal Investigation Team YouTube, and it'll pop right up for you, and become a subscriber on our YouTube page, because I also not only have these videos, but I also have some extras on there as well. And we're going to start doing some outtakes and stuff like that over there on that YouTube page that you guys can see. Anyway, again, thank you. Be sure to share this with 5 people, and I will see you guys. Let me get my page here. See, I'm getting ahead of myself. See, no falling mics today, so that was a good sign. Nothing falling down. And I will see you on Monday. Have a good one.